The security guard at Madison Square Garden almost didn't let him in. Jimmy Patterson was 67 years old, wearing a torn Vietnam veteran's jacket with faded patches, carrying everything he owned in a worn duffel bag. He looked exactly like what he was, a homeless man who had no business being at a Michael Jackson concert. But Jimmy had a ticket. Row 3, seat 14. He'd saved every penny for 3 years, collected cans, done odd jobs, slept in shelters on cold nights and under bridges on warm ones. All for this moment, all to say thank you to the man who had saved his life without ever knowing it. What happened when Michael Jackson spotted Jimmy in the front row during Man in the Mirror would stop the concert, silence 20,000 people, and prove that sometimes the people we save don't know we saved them until years later. And sometimes the greatest performances happen when superstars recognize that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears torn clothes and carries everything it owns in a bag. February 24th, 1988. Madison Square Garden, New York City. The Bad World Tour was in full swing, and Michael Jackson was at the absolute peak of his powers. Every show was sold out months in advance. Every performance was perfection. Every moment was magic. But nobody in that arena, not the 20,000 screaming fans, not Michael's band and dancers, not even Michael himself, knew that row 3, seat 14, held someone who had a story that would change everything. James Patterson sat in that seat with tears already streaming down his face, and the concert hadn't even started yet. Just being here, just being in this building, just knowing he was about to see Michael Jackson perform live, it was overwhelming in ways he couldn't explain to the couple sitting next to him who kept glancing at him with concern. Jimmy was 67 years old. His face was weathered and lined, showing every one of those years and then some. His hair was white and thin, cut military short because old habits die hard. His hands shook slightly, partly from age, partly from the cheap whiskey he'd had earlier to calm his nerves, partly from emotions he'd spent 3 years building toward this moment. He wore his old army jacket, the same jacket he'd worn in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970. It was torn now, faded, patches barely hanging on. But it was his, and it was the only thing from his old life that he still owned. On the left breast, his name tag, barely legible. On the right, a Purple Heart ribbon, earned in Da Nang in 1969 when shrapnel tore through his leg during an ambush that killed 3 of his friends. Jimmy had been handsome once, had been strong once, had been a lot of things once. Now he was homeless, had been for 5 years, living on the streets of New York City, sleeping in shelters when beds were available, under the West Side Highway overpass when they weren't. He wasn't an alcoholic, not exactly. He drank sometimes to forget, but mostly he was just tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of people crossing the street to avoid him, tired of the way society looked at veterans like him, grateful on Veterans Day, indifferent the other 364 days. But 3 years ago, something had changed. 3 years ago, Jimmy had been standing on the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge at 2 a.m. with every intention of jumping. He'd lost his apartment, lost his job, lost his dignity, and he'd decided he was done. He'd been standing there, looking down at the water, thinking about how cold it would be, thinking about how quickly it would be over, thinking about how nobody would miss him because nobody knew he existed anymore. And then a car had driven by with its windows down, and a song had been playing. A song so beautiful, so full of hope, so filled with voices singing together about healing the world that Jimmy had stopped, had listened, had recognized Michael Jackson's voice leading the chorus. We Are the World, released in 1985 to raise money for African famine relief. Jimmy had heard it before, of course. Everyone had. But that night, at that moment, with his foot literally on the bridge railing, those lyrics hit different. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. Jimmy had started crying. Not the quiet tears he was crying now in his Madison Square Garden seat, but loud, gasping sobs that shook his whole body. Because something in that song, something in Michael's voice, something in the way all those artists had come together to sing about hope and healing, had reminded Jimmy that he wasn't invisible, that he mattered, that maybe, just maybe, there was still a reason to stay. He'd climbed down from that railing, had walked to the nearest shelter, had woken up the next morning and decided to keep going. And every day since then, every single day for 3 years, Jimmy had saved money. Quarters from returning bottles and cans, dollar bills from helping unload trucks, $5 bills from standing outside grocery stores holding doors open for customers who sometimes tipped him and sometimes pretended not to see him. 3 years, 1,095 days, to save $127 for a concert ticket. Because Jimmy needed to say thank you, needed Michael Jackson to know that his music, his voice, his message, his art had saved a life that night on the Brooklyn Bridge, had saved a 64-year-old homeless Vietnam veteran who society had decided wasn't worth noticing anymore. The lights in Madison Square Garden dimmed. The crowd screaming reached a fever pitch, and Jimmy's tears flowed faster because this was it. This was the moment he'd worked 3 years toward. Michael Jackson exploded onto the stage in a burst of pyrotechnics and that signature high-energy opening that had become legendary. "Wanna be startin' something," shook the entire building. 20,000 people were on their feet, dancing, screaming, losing their minds. And Jimmy stood too. This 67-year-old homeless veteran with the torn jacket and the worn duffel bag at his feet stood and danced like he was 20 years old again. Like he was back before Vietnam, before the war, before everything went wrong. He danced with pure joy, with gratitude, with 3 years of emotion pouring out through movement. The couple next to him stopped being concerned and started smiling. The teenager behind him started cheering him on. Because there was something beautiful about this old man in the torn military jacket, dancing like Michael Jackson's music had given him permission to be young again. For the next hour, Michael performed hit after hit. Billie Jean, Beat It, Thriller, Bad, every song perfect, every dance move precise, every moment exactly what 20,000 people had paid to see. But then came Man in the Mirror. Michael walked to the front of the stage for this one. It was always the emotional centerpiece of his concerts, the moment when the party atmosphere shifted into something deeper. The song about looking at yourself honestly and deciding to change. The song about making the world better by starting with the person in the mirror. As Michael began singing, his eyes swept across the front rows. It was something he did often, making eye contact with fans, connecting with individuals in that sea of faces. His gaze moved across row 1, row 2, and then settled on row 3, on seat 14, on James Patterson, on a 67-year-old man with tears streaming down his weathered face, wearing a torn military jacket with a Purple Heart ribbon, mouthing every single word to Man in the Mirror like it was a prayer. Michael's voice faltered for just a second, just a heartbeat, but it was enough. He saw something in Jimmy's face, something in those tears, something in that military jacket, something in the way this old veteran was experiencing this song that hit Michael like a physical blow. Michael had performed Man in the Mirror hundreds of times, had seen thousands of people cry during it. But something about this man was different. The song built toward its powerful climax. Michael's voice soared. The gospel choir joined in. 20,000 people were swaying, many crying, all feeling the emotional weight of this moment. But Michael kept looking at Jimmy, kept seeing this homeless veteran crying in the front row, kept feeling like there was a story here that needed to be heard. When the song ended and the arena erupted in applause, Michael did something he'd never done before in the middle of a concert. He held up his hand, signaling for the band to wait, for the next song to pause. for everything to stop for just a moment. The crowd sensed something unusual was happening. The screaming quieted to confused murmuring. 20,000 people watching Michael Jackson just stand there at the front of the stage, looking down at someone in row 3. Michael pointed directly at Jimmy. "Sir, you, in the military jacket." Jimmy's heart stopped. Michael Jackson was pointing at him, talking to him. 20,000 people were now looking at him. "Would you come up here, please?" Michael's voice was gentle but firm. "I'd like to talk to you." The crowd went wild with excited confusion. This wasn't part of the show. This was spontaneous, real, unprecedented. Jimmy froze. His first instinct was to shake his head, to refuse, to disappear into the crowd. He was homeless. He was nobody. He didn't belong on that stage with Michael Jackson. But Michael was still pointing, still waiting, and the couple next to Jimmy was encouraging him. "Go! Go up there." Security guards appeared at the end of row 3, gesturing for Jimmy to follow them. His legs barely worked. His duffel bag fell from his hands. Someone behind him grabbed it, promising to keep it safe. The walk from row 3 to the stage felt like a mile, felt like walking through water, felt like a dream he was going to wake up from any second. When Jimmy finally walked off stage, escorted by security with instructions to take him to Frank DeLeo immediately, Michael picked up his microphone and said simply, "That's why we do this. That's why music matters. Because you never know whose life you might save with a song." Then he launched into "Heal the World," and the concert continued. But everyone in Madison Square Garden that night knew they'd witnessed something that transcended entertainment. They'd witnessed humanity. They'd witnessed what happens when fame is used not to elevate yourself, but to elevate someone who society had forgotten. Jimmy Patterson never slept in a shelter again. Frank DeLeo arranged for him to stay at a Midtown Manhattan hotel that first night, then helped him navigate VA services to get him into permanent supportive housing. True to his word, Michael hired Jimmy to work with his tour logistics crew. Not a charity position, but a real job managing equipment and coordinating with venues. For the remaining dates of the Bad World Tour, Jimmy traveled with the crew. He was 67 years old, learning a new trade, working harder than he'd worked in years, and he loved every minute of it. More importantly, Jimmy became a symbol. Michael made sure media covered Jimmy's story, not to promote himself, but to highlight how many veterans were falling through the cracks. The attention led to increased funding for veteran services, new shelter programs, and a national conversation about how America treated its heroes. Jimmy worked for Michael for 5 years until health issues forced him to retire at 72. But by then, he was housed, had savings, had dignity, and had a chosen family in Michael's crew who checked on him regularly. When Jimmy died in 1997 at age 76, Michael Jackson attended his funeral. In his eulogy, Michael told the Brooklyn Bridge story again, told everyone gathered how one song had saved one life and how one conversation on a stage had reminded him why he did what he did. "Jimmy thanked me for saving his life with 'We Are the World,'" Michael said. "But Jimmy saved my life too. He reminded me that music isn't about awards or sales or fame. It's about connection. It's about hope. It's about giving people a reason to come down from their bridges." Today, there's a small plaque in Madison Square Garden's backstage area. It reads, February 24th, 1988. The night Michael Jackson stopped a concert to honor James Jimmy Patterson, Vietnam veteran, and remind us all that every life matters. Tour crew members still tell the story to new staff. They call it the Jimmy moment, the reminder that working in entertainment is a privilege because sometimes, without knowing it, you're part of saving someone's life. Jimmy's Purple Heart was donated to the Smithsonian. It's displayed with a description of his service in Vietnam and a note about the night Michael Jackson brought him on stage. School groups visit it regularly. Teachers use Jimmy's story to talk about mental health, veteran care, and the power of human connection. Because sometimes the greatest performances aren't the ones with perfect choreography and flawless vocals. Sometimes they're the ones where superstars stop being superstars and start being humans who see other humans. Sometimes they're the moments when fame is used to say, "I see you," to someone society has decided is invisible. James Patterson stood on a bridge in 1985 and chose to live because of a song. Michael Jackson stood on a stage in 1988 and chose to honor that choice. And 20,000 people witnessed what happens when music stops being entertainment and becomes medicine. The ticket stub from that concert, row 3, seat 14, was framed and hung in Jimmy's apartment. When he died, it was found on his bedside table, with a note written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for reminding me I mattered. You saved my life twice, once with a song, once with compassion. Semper Fi, Jimmy." Michael kept that note in his personal belongings for the rest of his life. And sometimes, before going on stage, he'd read it. A reminder of why he did what he did. A reminder that fame is meaningless unless you use it to lift others. A reminder that the person in row 3 might need more than entertainment. They might need hope. And sometimes, giving them that hope is as simple as stopping a concert, calling them onto a stage and saying, "I see you. You matter. Thank you for staying."
The ticket stub from that concert, row 3, seat 14, was framed and hung in Jimmy's apartment. It became his most prized possession, more valuable than any medal or honor he'd ever received. When he died in 1997 at age 76, it was found on his bedside table with a handwritten note in shaky letters. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for reminding me I mattered. You saved my life twice, once with a song, once with compassion. Semper Fi, Jimmy." Michael Jackson attended Jimmy's funeral. He stood in front of a small gathering of Jimmy's chosen family, the tour crew members who had become his brothers and sisters, the VA counselors who had helped him rebuild his life, and the shelter volunteers who remembered the men he used to be. In his eulogy, Michael told the Brooklyn Bridge story one more time, his voice cracking with emotion. "Jimmy thanked me for saving his life with 'We Are the World,'" Michael said. "But Jimmy saved my life too. He reminded me that music isn't about awards or sales or fame. It's about connection. It's about hope. It's about giving people a reason to come down from their bridges." Today, there's a small plaque backstage at Madison Square Garden. It reads, "February 24, 1988, the night Michael Jackson stopped a concert to honor James Jimmy Patterson, Vietnam veteran, and remind us all that every life matters." Tour crew members still tell the story to new staff. They call it the Jimmy moment, the reminder that working in entertainment is a privilege because sometimes, without knowing it, you're part of saving someone's life. Jimmy's Purple Heart was donated to the Smithsonian. It's displayed with a description of his service in Vietnam and a note about the night Michael Jackson brought him on stage. School groups visit it regularly. Teachers use Jimmy's story to talk about mental health, veteran care, and the power of human connection. Because sometimes the greatest performances aren't the ones with perfect choreography and flawless vocals. Sometimes they're the ones where superstars stop being superstars and start being humans who see other humans. Sometimes they're the moments when fame is used to say, "I see you," to someone society has decided is invisible. But this story isn't just about Jimmy and Michael. This is about all of us. Because right now, as you're watching this video, there might be a Jimmy Patterson in your life. Someone who needs to be seen. Someone whose life could be changed by a song, a gesture, a simple, "I see you." Maybe it's a family member struggling in silence. Maybe it's a neighbor you pass without acknowledging. Maybe it's someone on the street whose brokenness makes you uncomfortable, so you look away. Jimmy saved $127 over 3 years, quarter by quarter. He did it as a man society had thrown away, because one song reminded him that his life had value. And Michael, with 20,000 people waiting for him to continue his show, chose to stop everything, to see one forgotten man, to give him back his dignity. Remember Jimmy's last line? "Thank you for staying." That "thank you" wasn't just for Michael, it was for every small act of kindness that pulled him away from that bridge. Every person who chose to see instead of ignore. Who can you be that moment for today? Whose life can you save with nothing more than the words, "I see you"? Because sometimes saving a life doesn't require fame or power. Sometimes it just requires you to see, to stop, to acknowledge, to remind someone that they matter. Michael Jackson showed us that true power isn't performing for thousands. True power is stopping for one. If you want to make the world a better place, start by seeing the invisible. Start by being someone's reason to stay. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that they matter.